Welcome to globalheadwinds.com, where we look beyond today's headlines to understand tomorrow's geopolitics. 5 years into Russia-Ukraine war, some of its most consequential battles are no longer being fought on the battlefield. They're being fought in pipelines, LNG terminals, electricity grids, and energy markets across the Europe. And perhaps the most dramatic legacy of this war is something that was barely visible when the conflict began: the complete restructuring of Europe's energy map. Think back to Europe before the war. For decades, Russia was not merely an energy supplier to Europe, it was in many ways the continent's energy lifeline. Russian oil and gas flowed westward through an enormous network of pipelines. European industries were built around relatively cheap and reliable Russian energy. Millions of European households depended on it to heat their homes throughout the winter. Then came February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine, and suddenly something that the Europeans had treated as an economic relationship was exposed for what it really was: a geopolitical vulnerability. Europe began the difficult process of breaking off its dependence on Russia. The numbers tell the story. Before the war, Russia supplied roughly 45% of Europe's oil imports. Today, that share has fallen to below 13%. That is an extraordinary transformation in just a few years. And make no mistake, this was not simply a commercial adjustment. It was an economic weapon designed to deprive Moscow of energy revenues that could help finance its war machine. But there was another, perhaps less obvious consequence. Europe was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. When a country outsources energy security to another country, it is also outsourcing a part of its sovereignty. Because energy is not just about economics, energy is power. If another country controls a substantial part of the energy you need to keep your homes warm, your factories running, and your economy moving, that country possesses a great degree of geopolitical leverage over you. In other words, energy dependence can become a geopolitical leash. And Russia demonstrated just how powerful that leash could be. So Europe began cutting it. But here is where the story gets interesting. Where is Europe getting its energy from now? The supplier map has been dramatically redrawn. Take oil. Before the war, Europe's major pipeline suppliers included Russia, Norway, Algeria, Azerbaijan, and Libya. Today the picture looks very different. Norway has moved to the top, Algeria follows, Russia has slipped down the ranking, followed by the United Kingdom and Azerbaijan. Russia has been pushed out of its dominant position, but it has not disappeared. And the same story can be seen in the liquefied natural gas, LNG. Before the war, Europe's major LNG suppliers included the United States, Qatar, Russia, Nigeria, and Algeria. Today, the United States has dramatically increased its LNG exports to Europe, more than doubling its shipments, and has emerged as Europe's leading supplier. Qatar, Nigeria, Algeria, and importantly Russia continue to feature in the supply chain. And there lies the paradox. Europe has gone to extraordinary lengths to reduce its dependence on Moscow, but it still hasn't completely cut the umbilical cord. The dependence has shrunk. It hasn't vanished. And that brings us to a much bigger question. Has Europe actually solved its energy security problem, or has it simply moved the problem somewhere else? Perhaps because Europe has moved away from Russia, but in doing so, it has become increasingly dependent on another major power, the United States. Now, Washington is undoubtedly a very different kind of partner from Moscow. But strategic dependence is still strategic dependence. And that should make European policymakers uncomfortable. Because Europe has seen this move before. For decades, European countries depended heavily on the United States for their military security through NATO. That arrangement remains enormously important. But geopolitical environment has changed. The transatlantic relationship today is not quite the same relationship that Europeans took for granted during the Cold War. American priorities are changing. Global power is shifting, and Europe is increasingly being asked to take a greater responsibility for its own security. So why should energy be different? If Europe believes that strategic autonomy matters in defense, surely the same principle must apply to energy. But there is another vulnerability that receives far lesser attention. Look at the map. Nigeria and Algeria are geographically convenient energy partners for Europe. But Russia has historically maintained significant political and strategic influence in both countries. And Moscow has every reason to use whatever influence it possesses to complicate Europe's search for alternative energy supplies. So Europe could find itself replacing one dependency with the collection of smaller dependencies. And that is not true energy security. The real answer is not to find another country to depend upon. The real answer is to reduce the need to depend on any country at all. And remarkably, Europe already possesses many of the ingredients required to do exactly that. Look at the renewable energy. Europe is already a global leader in renewable energy technology. The problem isn't necessarily a lack of technology. It is the lack of an integrated continental system capable of moving energy from where it is generated to where it is needed. Consider Southern Europe. Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Malta. These countries sit in one of the world's greatest solar belts. They have enormous potential to generate solar electricity. Now imagine a genuinely integrated European energy system in which surplus electricity generated in the Mediterranean can flow northwards into the industrial heartlands of France and Germany. And then look at Germany and France themselves. Both countries have major industrial economies and enormous energy requirements. Germany in particular should be thinking very seriously about how nuclear energy can contribute to its long-term energy security. France already possesses one of Europe's strongest nuclear energy foundations and could play an even larger role in continent-wide electricity system. And then there is Scandinavia. Norway gives the region an enormous strategic advantage through its energy resources and LNG exports. But that advantage should not become another excuse for complacency. The Scandinavian countries also have extraordinary potential in renewable energy, particularly wind power. Imagine what Europe could achieve if these pieces were connected. Solar energy from the Mediterranean, wind power from North Sea and Scandinavia, nuclear power from France and potentially Germany, hydropower from the north, LNG as a transitional and backup source, and the continent-wide electricity grid capable of moving energy across borders whenever and wherever it is needed. That would be something fundamentally different from simply changing suppliers. It would be the creation of the European energy sovereignty. The resources are there, the technology is there, the money, although substantial, is also available. What is missing is something much difficult to build: political will. Europe has spent decades integrating its markets. It has created a single market. It has created common institutions. It has created common rules and for much of the continent a common currency. But energy infrastructure still remains too fragmented. The next great European project should therefore not simply be about buying energy from a different supplier. It should be about building in the infrastructure that allows Europe to generate, transport, share, and secure its own energy. Because true energy security does not mean finding a safer supplier. It means reducing the need for a supplier to hold you hostage in the first place. At Global Headwinds, we have argued in several of our earlier videos that Europe needs to accelerate the process of integration. Energy security makes the argument even more compelling. Because Europe's future energy security cannot be built country by country. It has to be built as a continent. The ultimate lesson is simple. Europe does not need another energy superpower to depend on. Europe needs to become its own energy superpower. Can Europe become truly sovereign in its own backyard? That may well be the defining energy question for Europe over the next decade. If you enjoy fact-based geopolitical analysis that goes beyond the headlines, subscribe to globalheadwinds.com and join the conversation. New episodes explore geopolitics, geoeconomics, international relations, climate change, and the strategic trends shaping our world.